Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologize for a little bit late. The meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. Any exempt private items on the agenda, the live stream will cease prior to the meeting, moving into private. There might be a short delay. A recording of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Attendants are required to wear face masks on entry to the building and meeting room, which may be removed when seated. Would everyone in the hall please ensure you have scanned the QR NHS app poster with your mobile phone located at the entrance to the chamber. Would members and officers please remember to switch microphone on when speaking and speak directly into the microphone. Switch microphones off when finished. Reporting officers joining using Teams, use the heads up icon on your screen for questions and comments. Please turn your camera on. Please switch mobile phones off or place on silent mode. Any apologies for the absence?
Apologies from Councillor Burnett.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. As you said, we can bring later, yeah? Sure. Thank you. Section 106, Local Government Finance Act, 1992.
None, Chair.
Disclosure of interest.
None that I'm aware of.
I don't receive anyone. Any urgent business? Yeah. Item 7 and 8 from the external auditor have been deferred to a combined meeting with the Finance Review Group in January 2022. Instead, they have provided a position statement to the committee, which has been emailed to members, and a copy is in front of them on their desks. Ask Neil if he would like to read out the statement. Yeah, I will ask Neil. Anybody, all members have that statement? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed, and good evening, members of the Audit and Governance Committee. You will have received a position statement from EY ahead of this meeting. We are very near to the conclusion of historic audits, particularly the audit of the Council's financial statements for the 2018-19 financial year. We've prepared reports that we do intend to take in front of you as members of this committee regarding our audit results and conclusions for the 18-19 financial year, our planned audit strategy for the 19-20 financial year, including progress to date, and also an executive summary setting out our current view of the Council's value for money arrangements, taking into account all of the significant decisions that the Council has been taking over the past year associated with the LLAL stabilisation plan, its medium-term financial strategy, and ongoing decisions associated with the Council's financial sustainability. We have prepared those reports. We've shared draft copies with the Council's officers. The Council officers have raised a number of comments for us to consider, and we believe in light of that it's appropriate for us to take the time to finalise those reports with a view that we bring them as soon as practicable to the meeting of this committee and also jointly with the Scrutiny Finance Review Group. And my understanding is that a meeting's been scheduled for the 27th of January 2022 to receive our final reports. From an external audit perspective, we are now in a position where we do want to report our findings to councillors and to members of this committee and the Scrutiny Finance Review Group. We think that's now important to do so, and also to make sure that our findings are publicly available. But we do think it's appropriate, given that there are some comments on our draft reports, that we take the time to consider those and conclude our final position. And for that reason, that's why we've provided a position statement to this meeting and to give notice that our reports will follow as soon as possible. And that's all I was prepared to say this evening.
Thank you, Neil, for your report. Any questions?
The only question would be, again, I realise we've got to change things, but is that
Jeff Shepherd.
he said he hopes to bring, so is it a definite? So will we definitely have something on the 27th of January? That's my only question.
Councillor Chapman, yes, you will.
That's fine, thank you.
Is that okay? Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you, Neil, and see you next meeting, yeah, in January.
Thank you.
Thanks for the report. Thank you. Share anti-fraud report.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Nick Jennings. I'm the head of the Shared Anti-Fraud Service. This is an update report for the Audit Committee on the progress with delivery of the Council's anti-fraud plan for 2021-22. I'm going to assume that members have had the opportunity to read the report, so I'm just going to pick out some highlights for you, really. Starting on page 15, section 8 of the report, that's just to remind the committee that the audit plan, or the anti-fraud plan, I should say, that was approved back in March is the document that we're referring to, and a copy of that is provided for members at Appendix A. Just going through the report, I say, just picking up some highlights, really. On section 11 on page 16, we mentioned the number of counter-fraud staff that the Shared Anti-Fraud Service has deployed to Luton for this year, for the current year. We pick up on fraud awareness and prevention on the same page. In particular, those plans we had for some fraud awareness publicity that Luton Borough Council was part of back in November. That was tagging on to International Fraud Awareness Week, and we worked with the communications team to push out some comms for the council during that campaign in November. We also mentioned at the bottom of page 16 the ongoing e-learning training that's available for all staff at the council, and that's available on the council's intranet, so staff can access that. And we're making some inquiries at the minute about whether we can produce any reports to show that staff are undertaking that training, because it's mandated at present. Just going over to page 17, we talk about some of the counter-fraud activity. Section 18, we mentioned the number of allegations of fraud, or fraud referrals, as we call them. We had received 220 in the first half year. Actually, to the end of November, we've now had 254 allegations, which is a significant number. It continues to increase year on year that we work with Luton, which is great. Because it means that the staff are confident and able to report suspicions of fraud, and the public as well, who report the majority of matters into the Shared Anti-Fraud Service, also confident that if they report matters, that the council will take those seriously and they'll be investigated. Clearly, at that point, these are allegations of fraud. They're not proven fraud. They all have to be dealt with individually. Not every allegation that we receive results in a fraud investigation. Some are referred to other agencies or can be dealt with through administrative solutions. But where they do result in an investigation, that's dealt with by my team. And going over onto page 18 of your report, we've detailed there the outcomes of some of that work during the current year. We carried forward quite a significant number of cases at the beginning of the year. Some of those cases have been delayed due to our inability to conduct investigations and interviews during the COVID lockdowns back in 2020-21. So we carried forward quite a large case holding. We're actually now down to around 130 live cases. So we are seeing the volume of referrals increase, but our ability to manage those is much improved. And at present, we still, from the live caseload that we've got, there is still around £1.1 million of estimated fraud losses in those live cases. The cases that have been closed, again, we're just over 70 cases now, so we've advanced slightly since this report. We've now identified around £730,000 worth of fraud loss or fraud savings for the authority. And then just on section 22 on page 18, just to pick up there that we had recovered 8 properties to the end of November. We're now up to 12 council properties have been recovered that were being misused, either sublet or some other fraud in relation to those properties. So, recovering those properties is always a good news story because it means we can move somebody from the council's housing waiting list into accommodation. Just mentioned very briefly that the work that we're still doing around COVID-19, so part of the recovery work, and still supplying or supporting services that are dealing with some of the fallout from COVID, and that ongoing support into the current year as well. That goes over onto section 27, where we break that down in more detail. Just finally, just want to touch bottom of page 19, we pick up on proactive and prevention activity. This is really important to us. We'd rather prevent fraud happening in the first place. It's much better than trying to fix it later on and trying to recover losses. So a big part of our work this year has been working with the internal audit team and officers across the authority dealing with the National Fraud Initiative. The council received a huge number of reports and data matches to resolve as part of the National Fraud Initiative. Really pleased to say that work is progressing incredibly well. It's a huge success for the council this year. And the volume of matches and reports that have been cleared, the volume of fraud prevented as a result of that activity is really, really high and is detailed in section 30. Again, I can't take any of the credit for this. This is all the work of your internal audit team and your officers dealing with those matches that are relevant to those services. Sections 31, 32 and 33, we pick up some of the other one-off activity. So the NFI exercise looking at the single person discount review, which delivered around £60,000 of additional council tax. The review that we conducted looking at the council's data from grants that were paid between April 2020 and March 2021. We actually had 29 matches back to be reviewed where there was some potential discrepancy in relation to those grants. We've cleared all of those now. So again, officers have looked at all 29 of those grants. No issues have been raised with any of those. So we're really, really pleased that the council's got a clean bill of health in relation to any risk of fraud around the way it's dealt with grants and paid grants to businesses. So that's been really pleasing as well. Just picking up on the fraud hub, we've now started to put data into the NFI fraud hub. This will enable us to, rather than wait for the NFI to conduct their matches every 2 years, we'll be able to put data into the fraud hub and conduct reviews as and when we want. We've just started to put data in there, so we're testing that at the moment to see what that's telling us, ensure there's no duplication from the main NFI exercise, and start to build the artificial intelligence around that. So the fraud hub will tell us where there is a potential fraud within data held by the council. So that's a big project. It's taken us a long time to get where we are now. But that's just started to work. Quite literally towards the end of November, we had a full data load. So all the data that the council would normally submit to NFI, we're now putting into the fraud hub, which is absolutely brilliant. And just finally, Chair, on page 28 of your bundle, you'll see the shared anti-fraud service KPIs for the current year. Really pleased to report that those are all on target, probably with the exception, and I'm beating myself up a little bit, with KPI 5, where we're a little bit behind at the moment on some of the recovered properties and some of the cases that were due for investigation. But actually, we anticipate that target will be met by the end of the financial year as well. Very happy to take questions at that point, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions, please? Yes, Underwood first.
Thank you, Chair. On page 20, Neil, you're talking about the Hearts Fraud Hub. Is the intention for that to replace the work that the information you get from NFI? Or is that...
No, Councillor. Unfortunately, the main NFI exercise is a mandatory exercise. We have to take part in that every 2 years. But what we found when we ran that in with Hertfordshire County Council is that by running the fraud hub and using that data more frequently, the data matches and the reports that we receive as part of the 2 yearly exercise is vastly reduced. So I've mentioned earlier that the council received, I think it was 17,000 matches. We'd be looking to half that over the next 2 years, which means that we're not dealing with a big bulk of work every 2 years, it becomes part of the business as usual. So we identify fraud quickly, prevent it, so that by the time we come around to the natural exercise, it's already been resolved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Underwood? Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Chapman, please.
Sorry, it's going to be one I'm going to ask lots of. Just on workforce, will we have issues, and have you, like most people seem to have issues with getting people in to do the work, and could that be a problem going forward? Thank you.
Are you referring to officers within my service, Councillor?
Well, possibly yours or just general. From most jobs, anecdotally, you know, we're having problems with getting people with the right calibre for whatever. So I'm just kind of asking the question of audit in general or of the council, if I can be that open.
Okay, I don't think it's my place to comment on general recruitment across the authority. Certainly within my service, we're fully staffed. The staff we have are properly trained and accredited, and whenever we run recruitment campaigns, we're able to fill vacancies. So I don't know whether that's a complete response to you, but it certainly deals with my service.
Oh, that's fine. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Javeria, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Officer. Good to hear some positive news, given the current climate that we're in. With regards on page 28, correct me if I misunderstood. You said the recovery of council property is slower than initially anticipated, and is there a reason for that, or have I just misunderstood what you've said?
One of our focus in the first half year has been to recover properties, but you'll see on KPI 5 that one of the areas that we want to focus on is section D, where we're looking at temporary accommodation, so potential fraud around people claiming to be homeless or in need of emergency accommodation. That's a piece of work that we haven't picked up as yet. Our focus has been on recovering those properties which the council already have available in stock, where there's allegations of misuse. So that's, I'm probably beating myself up a little bit, but that's an area we really want to focus on in the second half year.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Thank you, Councillor Javeria. Any more questions? No more questions. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I move to agenda item 9 is internal audit plan update. I think it's Kancha, isn't it? Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. The report on the internal audit plan update provides an update on the work the service have carried out in the first 6 months of this year. If I can take you to paragraph 6, which explains that the annual audit plan is risk-based and it's prepared in consultation with management, including a review of risk registers and approved by CLMT and Audit and Governance Committee. Paragraph 7 of the report details that the plan is 1,200 days and it's based on an expected full complement of staff. At the moment, we do have one full-time vacancy at the moment, and a member of staff is also on long-term sick, which is impacting the achievement of some of the work. The recruitment to the vacant post is currently on hold, as we are currently undertaking a review of the team structure to ensure that we've got the right level and mix of skilled auditors required to take that forward. In terms of performance, we have achieved 45% of the plan as at the end of September, and we also have a number of performance indicators that we report to committee on a quarterly basis. The majority of the audit recommendations that have been raised, I'm pleased to say that recommendations have been accepted by management. In terms of the audit work we've carried out, that's detailed in paragraph 13 of the report. We've issued 35 audit reports as at the end of September, and of those, 4 of those were limited assurance opinions. 3 of those have already been reported to the committee previously. So if I can just touch on the new audit, which has been issued a limited assurance opinion, that's Queen Elizabeth School, which was formerly known as Ashcroft High School. In July 21, we carried out an audit review and we identified a number of internal control weaknesses across the majority of the areas we examined during the review. A number of recommendations were raised. In particular, there were 2 high priority recommendations in relation to the school's compliance with procurement procedures. Since the audit review, the school have confirmed that they have made considerable progress to implement the agreed recommendations and to strengthen internal controls. And as you can see, majority of them have now been fully implemented. All outstanding recommendations are expected to be discussed at the next school's full governing body meeting in December. And as part of our 6-monthly follow-up procedures, we will be carrying out a first physical follow-up review in the final quarter to provide a subsequent update to committee on the outcome of that review. Section 17 of the report details the implementation of recommendations and the follow-ups that we have undertaken. In the year to date, we have followed up on 193 recommendations, and I'm pleased to report that 74% of those high and medium priority recommendations have been fully implemented. There are a small number of recommendations which are now outstanding, and we understand in some cases there have been delays in fully implementing those recommendations due to the impact of COVID and services schools focusing on the response to the pandemic. I'm happy to take any questions on that report, Chair.
Thank you, Kanja. Any questions so far? No. Kanja, I think it's the next one you as well. Can you carry on?
That's right. Thank you. The next report is around the corporate risk update report. So in May 2020, so this is from paragraph 5 onwards, there was an independent review carried out on the Council's corporate governance and risk management framework. As part of that review, there was a recommendation made in relation to the review of the Council's risk matrix and a suggestion that we use a larger risk matrix, which would allow us to more flexibly score the risks and provide more granular information for management as what the key risks might be. Since the risk management strategy was introduced, we have been using the 3x3 risk matrix, which is detailed in paragraph 6 and 7 of the report. We considered the pros and cons of using a larger risk matrix, and it was agreed by CLT to adopt a 4x4 risk assessment matrix, which is used by CIPFA, and this will allow us more flexibility in the scoring of those risks. The 4x4 risk matrix is detailed in paragraph 8 of the report. So there is a project currently underway now to implement the new 4x4 risk assessment matrix, which is expected to be completed by the end of December. All risk owners are required to reassess their scores using this new 4x4 risk matrix. And in addition to that, we have also delivered some training, which has been run by CIPFA, and the strategy has also been updated to reflect this. There are currently 35 risks on the corporate risk register, and since the last update to this committee, 3 risks have been added to the register. These are detailed in paragraph 11 of the report. The first one is in relation to the deterioration of our operational estates, highways and network. The second one is a second risk on climate change, which we have discussed at this committee in previous meetings. And the third one is around the expectation that there'll be an increased demand in special education needs and disabilities and how we will be coping with that demand. So of those 35 risks, considering the controls and mitigation, there are currently 12 risks which remain as high priority, and these are detailed in the table at section 13 of the report. At the moment, these are scored using the 3x3 matrix, but hopefully when we come to the next committee meeting, there will be an update in terms of what are the real key high priority risks once they've been reassessed using the 4x4 risk matrix. Paragraph 14 of the report, that details, there was a question at the last committee meeting in respect of the failure to achieve the emission reduction target of 2040 of net zero carbon emissions and how the council will achieve this in real terms. So there is a summary of the actions which have been taken by the council in terms of achieving that, so that there's some details there on that. Happy to take any questions on that report, Chair.
Thank you, Kanja. Any questions? No. Thank you very much for your report, Kanja.
Thank you.
If we're moving to agenda item 11, Treasury Management Outcome Strategy, Service Director Dave.
Thank you. Just bear with me. Okay, so thanks, Chair. So this is the Treasury Management Annual Report. It's for the year 31st of March 2021. So we have to report to full council, and it was discussed at FRGR as well. So basically, the council in paragraph 2 is required under the Local Government Act to produce an annual strategy report reviewing the treasury management activity and the actual prudential and treasury indicators. As I've mentioned previously, basically you've got your capital program, and your capital program, if it's not funded through capital receipts, then the balance you've got to borrow. And when you have to borrow, then you incur interest, and you have to set aside something which we call MRP, basically is repayment of capital. So in a nutshell, your capital program drives your borrowing strategy and your MRP and interest. And at the same time, if during the year you've got additional cash flow, in our case, sometimes you can have additional cash flow, then you have to invest. So all these get agreed by the council in February. So for 22-23 to be agreed by the council. And once the council agree, then there are set parameters which called prudential code, and you have to follow those key parameters, and officers will have to operate within those parameters. And then on a regular basis, 6 monthly and yearly, we have to come to the executive and FRG and council to say whether we've breached those code. And if we think we are going to breach, i.e. we are going to borrow more or less, if it's less, it's okay, but if you borrow more, then you need council approval. So we do set what we call the boundaries, and we have to operate. So first, if you see in the recommendation, we have to report that the council didn't breach any of its prudential indicators. So we didn't have to come back to the council to ask for any sort of additional headroom. So on the current position on paragraph 3, as I've just captured, is the capital activity, the prudential code indicators, the borrowing, the investment. So what has happened during the year ended 31st of March 2021. So the detail on Appendix A and Appendix B, but I will just take you through some of the key highlights. So paragraph 4 says, as explained, your capital expenditure is funded either by capital receipts, or sometimes you can fund it through revenue resources, or sometimes you can fund through Section 106. Sometimes you get grant, like right now, government has agreed a leveling up fund of 20 million. So those are the things which we'll call upon to fund your capital expenditure. And then the balancing figure, technically speaking, as second bullet point in paragraph 4 mentions, is give rise to your borrowing need. So your borrowing is very much driven by your capital program. So for 2021, paragraph 5 says the estimate, which is as per the budget, was 190 million, but the actual was 141. So the total capital expenditure was less than what was budgeted. And paragraph 6 point out that's mainly because of some of the projects were reprofiled, and part of it was to do with the subsidiary companies, the airport, and the temporary TAPS, which is temporary accommodation purchase. Largely, those represent the main reason why there was an under sort of expenditure on capital program. And TAPS was mainly because there was COVID and there was lockdown, so it was not easy to buy properties and to move people within those new properties. So there was 11 million of TAPS reprofile. By reprofiling means these currently we're spending those. So the budget was not as if written back, but it was reprofiled to be spent in 22-23. Then the next paragraph I would refer to is paragraph 12, and once you've got your capital expenditure, then it gives you an increase in your what's called CFR. CFR is the capital financing requirement. So basically it says if you spend £1 million and if it's capital expenditure, then technically speaking, you can borrow up to 1 million. That is your CFR, your capital financing requirement to fund your capital program. So you will see in this, it gives you a summary, what was the CFR said based on the capital program and what was the CFR actual. And you will see there was a reduction in the CFR because mainly there was a reduction in the capital program. And then that leads to paragraph 14, and that's what it draws on the capital financing requirement and borrowing. But borrowing is slightly different because we can have an underlying need to borrow. So let's say we set a CFR of 10 million, but what happens throughout the year, we have additional upside in our cash flow. So last year was quite good in terms of central government provided quite a lot of upfront cash. and that's to do with COVID money, Section 31 grant. So there was a lot of additional cash which government did provide to ease cash flow issues with local authorities. So we didn't have to borrow that level. So that's why you will see is the total debt CFR. If you see the table below paragraph 14, our capital financing requirement was actual 778, but the total debt was 609. So why we borrowed less? Because we use our cash flow not to borrow. And that's what we call over borrowing. So there was under borrowing, and that's sometimes you will hear me using the term internal borrowing. But that is not long term, and we are driving down those internal borrowing. So that's where you get those internal borrowing and how much you're borrowing. And you will see compared with 1920, we borrowed more because we had more cash. Paragraph 16 gives you a bit of what is operational boundary and authorized limit. So those are the limit, as I've said, set by the council, and we have to follow those. So that's basically give us the three key element to it. What is your capital program, which is driving your CFR, which is driving your borrowing requirement, and how much actually you borrowed depends on whether you're doing more internal borrowing. I would summarize those, but the key point, if going back to the recommendation, Chair, is to note that we didn't breach any prudential limits as set out by the council. Because once the council set the limit, we as officers, we have to operate within those limits, and we can't go above those limits. And those limits, as I said, is very much driven by the capital program. If you put more on the capital program, then you have a need to borrow, which is the CFR, and then you go and borrow. So the treasury management is very much linked with what is the capital program. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for your report, Dave. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Underwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. Deb, could you I'm a bit lost with the operational boundary. What is the operational boundary and what effect does it have?
That's a good question, because you will see it's technical, but what basically during the year, you may end up borrowing more or less, depending on the cash flow and the profiling of your capital expenditure. So sometimes if you see that there's a need to borrow more during the months or borrow less during the months because you are spending more, but the cash you are going to receive will be less, then you might end up go above the authorized, and that gives you the operational boundary. So this is more for operational purposes, but the underlying need to borrow is driven by the capital program. But for operational, let's say last year was a typical example. You may have, because the amount of cash which flows through the council is, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in terms of business rate, council tax, benefits. So if, let's say, we are incurring additional costs due to COVID related, but the government will pay us when you make a claim. So some of them, government gave very much cash in advance to ease the cash flow, but some of them, like sales fees and charges, we have to make a claim. So you might end up, due to operational activity, you might end up needing more working capital. So that's working capital is just a temporary, it goes up and down. So the operational boundary allows you to work within that boundary, but the underlying need to borrow is very much driven by the capital program, and you can't go above that CFR. To give a little bit of headroom just because of operational activity, but the underlying need to borrow is driven by the CFR. It's a bit technical, Councillor, but yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I think I'm following that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Underwood. Any more questions? Yeah, Councillor Javeria, please.
Thanks very much for your report, Deb. Just wanted to, again, point of clarification on page 73, in the second table on paragraph 12. The major repairs reserve, is that repairs in terms of council properties portfolio of properties? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So basically is like in private sector, we've got what you call depreciation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in HR way, that's what you call the major repairs reserves.
Okay.
So sometimes this can be used to do quite a lot of what you call structural maintenance program.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah?
Got it.
So that's why it's within that capital expenditure. It's
Okay.
major repairs, so you can capitalize it.
Okay.
Yeah?
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Javeria. Any further questions? No. Thank you very much, Dave, for your report. And if I move to agenda item 12 is Regulatory Investigatory Power Act 2000 Annual Report. Report of the Service Director, LLAL and Monitoring Officer. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It may be some time since the committee received a report relating to this matter, so I'll just give a little bit of background. The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 regulates the use and conduct by the Council of covert surveillance tactics when the Council is seeking to investigate a criminal offence. That's very important to stress that it relates only to potential criminal activity and not to civil matters. What are covert surveillance tactics? Well, they're either sitting outside somebody's house or a business or some other property to see what is going on, what the movements are to and from that property, or it's active surveillance in terms of following a suspect to see what they're up to. And it also involves things like using hidden CCTV at a suspected crime hotspot and the use of undercover informants, covert human intelligence sources, as they're described in the regulations. And it's very important that these things are done strictly according to the statutory framework. That's not only a question of natural justice and what is right, but it also means that if it is properly followed, the council is protected in the case of any claims or complaints, and the evidence that is gathered will be admissible in a court. It's important to stress that the council actually makes very, very sparing use of the powers that it has under RIPA. In fact, I'm not aware of any cases recently. But nevertheless, it is important that those who are designated as authorising officers, which means that they can authorise the use of a covert surveillance technique or tactic, are kept up to date with the requirements, and also that the use and conduct of those techniques is properly monitored internally. And I have the responsibility as your monitoring officer to act as the senior responsible officer in respect of those particular functions. In effect, you might say the council's spy master. The use is governed not only by the statute, but also by codes of practice that are issued by the Home Office. And one of those codes of practice requires that I report to you on an annual basis on the use of the powers by the council in the previous year. I apologise, Chair, that this report is only coming to you in December, relating to the year ended 31st of March 2021, but I only took responsibility for this area of work in August. Dealing with that particular issue, I can confirm that there was no use of the powers during that year. The report also brings to your attention the outcome of an inspection that was undertaken of the Council's preparations and arrangements for the use and conduct of its powers under the Act by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. And that took place in summer of last year. Because of the conditions then prevailing, it was a telephone interview with my predecessor as monitoring officer. The inspector was generally satisfied with the arrangements at Luton and was happy that issues identified in the previous inspection, which took place in 2016, these inspections don't happen very often, Chair, had been reflected in the policy that was approved by the executive in 2018. But he did make 2 points. There was no evidence that authorising officers had received refresher training since the previous inspection in 2016, and there was no evidence that you had received a report on the use of the powers since 2018. The purpose of this report, therefore, is to give you assurance on both those points. Refresher training has been arranged for authorising officers and is currently being undertaken. Of the 8 officers who are required to undertake it, at this point in time, 5 of them have completed the training successfully, and the other 3 are no doubt trying to find the time to do it. Although it is online training and only takes about half an hour, so it's not onerous. And with regard to the use of the powers, this is the report, Chair.
Thank you, John, for your report. Any questions? Yeah, Councillor Chapman, please.
Well, it was one, I think you kind of answered it, was that I presume, not being rude, but it's like a cut and paste with Appendix A. As you said, it's statutory powers that are suggested to us by the government or by bodies. And so other authorities would have similar ones with just a little bit tweaking to suit Luton's requirement?
Yes, that's absolutely true. There is a standard approach to policy and procedure.
Thank you very much. Just one other thought going forward. It might be worth, I don't know, having a different colour for the tweak that is Luton as opposed to others, so that when we look at it again, it's easier to say that's specific to Luton, possibly.
Point taken, Chair.
Councillor Underwood, please.
Thank you. Is the reason why that there was no previous inspections? Sorry, there's no refresher training, or no one's been to this committee to give a report. Is that because the powers haven't been used? Is it because there's, I don't know, sort of like a relaxed attitude towards it, up to date, or because the powers haven't been used, no one's felt the need to do the refresher training or to do this annual report?
I cannot comment on the judgments made by my predecessor as monitoring officer, Chair, but I can tell you that it is an expectation that refresher training will be undertaken on a relatively regular basis, despite the fact that the council does not choose to use the powers that it has, and it is a requirement of good practice that I make an annual report to you, even if there is nothing to report.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you. What's the question? I've forgotten what the question was now. It was, yeah.
Yeah, I will come back to you when you remember. Councillor Juveria, please.
Thank you very much for your report. Just a question is that these inspections, are they regular or are they just standard inspections? Are they just, and do we get prior notice of that? And is there a reason that we're usually given for the inspections, or are they just, does the or are we just told there's that an inspection's taking place? Sorry, I've got chewing over my mouth. Talk properly.
Chair, inspections take place on a periodic basis, and they usually operate on around about a 4-year cycle. There's no particular trigger for an inspection. It is just done on the basis of that time factor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jueria. Yeah, Councillor Underwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. So your role, you have both roles, monitoring officer and the senior responsible officer. Do you have a deputy or a stand-in if you're not available? And there's no conflict of interest between the two roles, is there?
No, there is certainly no conflict of interest between the roles. It's always been the case that the monitoring officer has acted as the senior responsible officer in respect of this function. There could well be a conflict of interest if I were also an authorising officer, but that's not the case. There is a clear separation of duties set out in the policy, and the deputy monitoring officer would act as a deputy senior responsible officer if I was unavailable.
Is there a named person as your deputy? I didn't see that in there.
Yes, the deputy monitoring officer is Samantha McKeeman, who is a principal solicitor in the legal service.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Underwood. Any more questions? No. Thank you. Before I finish the meeting, I would like to wish you all Merry Christmas and Happy New Year if I don't see you again before that. And you have a fantastic time. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming tonight.